Hello everyone, welcome to the second episode of Hot Coffee, Hot Topics. We are trying a little different format today, doing this video as an audio recording to see if that helps to improve the sound quality, which was some of the feedback that we got from our first video. So thank you to all of our clients who reached out to discuss the new feature here that we are offering. A lot has definitely transpired over the last few weeks and months since our first video, and we wanted to touch base today on some common themes that are being brought up in our client conversations. So I have Jess on the episode with me today, and we're going to just dive straight in. Jess, what are some of the key economic points you're talking about with clients right now as we wait for the market to turn around?
So lately, the looming interest rate increases have been a hot topic I've noticed as the Fed positions itself to significantly raise rates above where they've been over the coming months. This rate increase is the FOMC, which stands for Federal Open Market Committee's primary means of adjusting the stance of monetary policy through changing the target rate of the federal funds rate. And recently, the Fed was a year late in raising rates, which in Bill, Tony, and my opinion, is because the president of the Fed felt political pressure. However, as it stands now, former President Janet Yellen is now head of the Treasury and should know better, having been in that position herself. So while these rate increases are an attempt to prevent inflation, they shouldn't be mistaken as a cure.
How does this relate to unemployment and inflation, which we keep hearing mentioned in the media?
Overall, as demand slows down, the tendency is that unemployment rises and inflation decreases. The FOMC can help stabilize the economy in the face of a slowing economy by stimulating overall demand through an easing of monetary policy that lowers interest rates. On the flip side, demand increasing triggers unemployment to decrease and inflation to rise. In this situation, the Fed can guide economic activity back to more sustainable levels and keep inflation in check by tightening monetary policy to raise interest rates. This rise in interest rates and curb on inflation not only depresses spending, hiring, and investments, but it is a path the Fed has started on and intends to continue this year. The Fed has bought back $120 billion in U.S. Treasuries and mortgage-backed securities every month since the start of COVID-19. Currently, as bonds mature, the Fed reinvests those dollars back into treasuries or mortgage securities. But as they try to remove heavy accommodations, they plan to allow the bonds to mature without replacing them. With that, you get balance sheet runoff, termed quantitative tightening.
How will this affect fixed income markets?
So looking at historical data, one recent example is when the Fed reduced their balance sheet from January of 2018 to September of 2019, following multiple quantitative easings. In this situation, the Fed's exit as a buyer of treasuries and mortgages did not result in a negative performance.
Will the Fed follow a similar tact this time?
Though not much information has been shared, the Fed is likely to behave in a similar nature with several points being watched. The first is that the balance sheet has ballooned to 40% of GDP, so pacing is likely to be quicker until it reaches 20% of GDP. Second, there is roughly $45 billion in runoff each month, which may then increase to $80 or $100 billion, which will allow a contraction of $2.8 trillion by the third quarter of 2025. With the amount of Treasury securities set to mature over the course of the next few years and 20% of the GDP balance sheet target, the Fed is unlikely to be active sellers in these markets, which should help keep the market volatility contained. Mortgage-backed securities may be more susceptible to this spread widening due to the outsized influence the Fed has had on this market. The reason being because the Fed has been by far the largest buyer of mortgage-backed securities recently and will likely be directly impacted by this runoff.
Is there a concern of the recent high rate of inflation and its effect on the rate increase?
So this risk is known as the risk of stagflation. It's a mix of sluggish growth and rising prices. It puts pressure on the Federal Reserve, whose job is to keep inflation and unemployment low. And one of the most relatable examples I can think of is in the 1970s, which a lot of clients might remember, when people had to line up to fill their cars with high-priced gasoline during a jobless rate era of 9%.
Is stagflation a risk now?
So right now, the U.S. inflation is at a 40-year high, and parts of the economy are cooling as interest rates rise. Home sales have fallen in recent months, consumer spending growth has slowed, job gains have lost steam since the start of the year, and supply chains remain disrupted by the war in Ukraine, with production problems related to the COVID-19 pandemic continuing. A survey of economists by the Wall Street Journal expect that the economy barely grew the second quarter after contracting at a 1.6% annual rate in the first 3 months of the year. They forecast GDP expanded at an inflation and seasonally adjusted annual rate of 0.3% from April through June. While there's no mathematical formula defining whether we are experiencing stagflation, economists generally agree that it would be a sustained period of both high inflation and slow growth, not just 1 or 2 quarters, so it is a risk that will continue to be monitored.
What is the difference between stagflation and inflation?
So inflation refers to an increase in prices for goods and services, whereas stagflation is a situation in which prices are rising rapidly, but demand is weakening and economic growth is slowing or contracting. As a result, businesses make less money and cut jobs, driving up unemployment.
Is there an inflation goal set by the Fed?
The Fed typically targets 2% inflation in a given year, which is a signal of healthy demand in the economy. If inflation rises too quickly, the rapid price increase erodes a household's purchasing power. As measured by the Fed's preferred gauge, the Commerce Department's Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index, consumer prices rose 6.3% in May from a year earlier. Another more widely followed gauge, the Labor Department's Consumer Price Index, rose 9.1% in June.
Long term, how does this affect the markets?
Ideally, the balance sheet runoff I mentioned earlier goes on in the background with little impact on the markets. While interest rate hikes are still the primary tool for reducing monetary support, however, the uncertainty in decisions made on the Fed balance sheet are likely to continue market volatility over the next few years.
Great. Well, it sounds like now is an important time for us to be in regular communication with our clients. If you haven't been in for a client review recently, we would definitely love to have you in and discuss what's going on in the economy, how it pertains to your specific portfolio, and keep strong heads on our shoulders as we continue to ride the wave here of what is going on with our volatile market. So thank you so much for listening in today. Jess, thank you for your insight, and we will catch you next time.